music artist, as and he studied in the traditional Guru Sisya Parampara. Pandit Chatterjee, senior disciple of the late Sitar maestro Pandit Nikul Banerjee of the Mahara. And the Guru Sisya Parampara has a very integral core philosophy of playing as well. So we have someone who kind of lives that as well as part of his intellectual tradition and work. So Srini also has been author of several books. I think what, 5 manuscripts?
4.
4? Okay.
Working on the 5th.
Yeah, working on the 5th one, and his last one, Raya, created a lot of splash. I don't know if you have read, but the excellent book that talks about and in fact William Dalrymple and Sachin Tharoor also recommends it. So I think they're going to plug that in as well. So it has quite a lot of critical acclaim in addition to his other works. So today Srini is going to be talking about, I did that to him because I'm sure he'll do a better job than I, about the syncretic tradition and locating the sitar within that. And it's an introductory kind of a session, and it's open, it's interactive, I'm guessing as well. So we are going to be having a discussion as well as part of in the aftermath of your demonstration. So I think these sessions are typically called, which I was very unfamiliar with this whole lecture situation, but I understand that it's like very common, the lecture demonstration. But so over to you, Srinivas is also a very good friend, so it feels a little odd to even introduce him so formally, and welcome to Flame. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
I would request Samir to introduce our tabla artist today. Thank you, Srinivas. Thank you.
Very good evening, all of you. Even if Srini, the audience number is a little less, we in Maharashtra have a tradition of Shivaji Maharaj. And during his time, the Adil Shah and Aurangzeb would have 10,000 even sabta, 50,000 even sabta. So each one of these kids is equal to almost 1,000 people. So I'm here to introduce our tabla artist, Pandit Charudat Patti, who is also our visiting faculty for tabla. He is disciple of Pandit Suresh Darwalkarji, eminent maestro of tabla, and he has been into tabla since his childhood, almost 30 years now, and we have been working with each other for the last 25 years. And it's wonderful to have Srini on campus, and it's a pleasure listening to you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so thank you so much, Tanishta, Samir, Chatterjee. We just met just 1 hour back, and this is how our music works. It's improvisatory, it's in the moment, and it's very much music from the heart in that sense. So even the small amount of time that we sat, I know we're going to have a good time. And part of that intimacy of the music is also the listenership too. So I'm honored to be at Flame, and I thank all of you for taking time to be here and listen. And if you want to come closer, please do. You guys in the back, you don't have to be shy. We can have more of dialogue and conversation. You can ask questions. So basically, I'll speak a little bit about some of these ideas in a very broad sense. Thank you for moving up. And then we'll play, and then we'll have some Q&A. Sound good? So to talk about Indian music, it's a vast subject. And oftentimes, the idea of a tradition, something that's been going on for thousands of years, and like this whole narrative that we hear, Indian music started in the Vedas, and all this, a lot of that is kind of true, and a lot of it is kind of maybe not true. And truth lies somewhere in between those extremes of thought. So in the same way, the two main concepts that we're going to talk about today are tradition and modernity or innovation, and how oftentimes the dialogue around these topics, whether it's in music or literature or any other field, is kind of a contrastive, setup. Like, that's the traditionalist, and this is the person who's the iconoclast, who's innovating and doing something different and breaking with tradition. But my thesis throughout this talk were really, to say and to try to explore the fact that these two concepts are actually intimately connected, and they in fact have to be together. The definition of tradition is innovation. The only reason a thing can continue to live for thousands of years, which Indian music definitely has, is through innovation. Because a static thing dies. A dynamic thing lives. Because life is dynamic, people are dynamic. So the idea of tradition to me is actually intimately connected to innovation. Intimately connected to technologies of the time. And we see this happening in several different kind of epochs of history. So I just wrote down a little table to base my we'll look at tradition and technologies. We'll look at modernity, this idea of modernity. What does modernity mean? I mean, for someone in 1900, that was modern for their time, right? So modernity is also a fact of your particular moment in time when you invoke that sense. So we have to see modernity as not a specific time period, but a state of mind for whoever is thinking about those things. So tradition, modernity, and then the Sitar, which in many ways represents a lot of these themes that we'll talk about. So when we talk about Indian arts, the first thing, at least from a textual standpoint, that I work on a lot of old texts. So the first thing that we talk about is the Natya Shastra. Bharata's Natya Shastra. This is an amazing ancient text that talked about music and drama and theatrical production and rasa, and all of these concepts were in this text. And even the idea of the Natya Shastra has in it elements of something of that innovative modernity. In the very first chapter of the Natya Shastra, they call it the Panchama Veda. And this was important because what it's really saying is art is for everybody. All people have access to art. And art was not in contrast to something like, that's knowledge, that's academic, and this is art, and kala is over here. No. Art was art, it's just another type of knowledge. So the idea of a Panchama Veda, art as another form of knowledge that was open to everyone, was kind of, for that time period, quite in advance. And it's a Shastra. So a Shastra means science, a discipline. So this was a discipline, a science, an art form that was open to all people. I find that to be really important to think about and quite fascinating for that period of time. And again, to date Indian text is quite difficult. And this is another point. There's so many points about Indian ways of being, living, creating that we also need to think about. For example, from a Western perspective, you're always asked, okay, what is that date of that text? What is the date of that person? Yeah, an Indian text does not have a date. It's also a dynamic thing. It grows and people add to it a little bit, people subtract a little bit, this happens, that happens, they change over time. So the text itself is dynamic. People make commentaries on it, like Abhinavagupta wrote a big commentary on Natya Shastra. That was another kind of evolution of that text in time. So these texts kind of move along in time. Bharata, also a Muni, which is interesting. Inside of again, even in the first chapter, they talk about Bharata having 100 different sons. And how Shiva and all these guys came down, and these are all the mythological kind of origins. And again, scholars might say, this is some stories. But those stories have meaning. And that's what we're really concerned with. Ascertaining like the factuality of historical time, or the existence or non-existence of an author or a commentator is really, in my opinion, secondary to true scholarly inquiry. What we really want to know is, what do these things mean? What kind of signification do they give to that time period and our time period today? So when I hear a story like Bharata Muni had 100 sons that he taught this music to, what that means to me, one of the things I derive from that is, A, like Tanisha was saying, Guru Shishya, the human transmission of knowledge is essential to this art form, or to this science. I will even call it science. There's no difference between science and art here. The same thing. They're just different types of knowledge. So the human transmission of knowledge, that's essential. And number two, these 100 sons all kind of carried on their tradition in a different way. So even though Bharata was the originator, many different styles evolved out of what Bharata might have said. So the idea that you can have common origins, but a variety of interpretations, this is also another essential part of music. This is what we hear about different gharanas, different schools, different interpretations. Everybody plays Teen Tala, but everybody plays it a little bit different. That's the beauty. So you can be one thing and express in a different way, and there's no problem with that. It's not a contradiction, it's not a problem, it's actually the beauty of the whole thing. Everybody plays the same rags, but everyone plays them a little bit differently. It's just like cooking. Everybody eats, upma maybe, but everyone's mom, makes upma a little bit different. But that's the beauty, that's the fun of it. And that's like what music is. And that's really what knowledge is. And part of that is because individuals are the ones transmitting it. Not a standardized textbook. Even though you have an idea of a text, that text needs to be interpreted, and that interpretation happens through human beings. So one of the things that Bharata does mention in his text is a veena. And one of the things he describes in that, and we don't actually really know 100% whether or not it was like, the South Indian veena that we see today, whether it was a stringed instrument even of this nature. Some people think it was more like a harp. Whatever it was a stringed instrument. So stringed instruments were definitely there, and then we're talking at least, probably like 200 BC time. One of the things he explains with that veena is the idea of this 22 shrutis. Okay? The idea that the scale from sa to sa is broken up into these 22 notes, or shrutis. And this, I'll come back to this point in a second and why it's significant. So the veena, just to say, at Nachasastra time, we had the idea of stringed instruments, we had a science of music, of art that was passed down orally through teacher-student discipleship, very important. We had multiple interpretations of things. We had a diversity of thought, even though there was a kind of standardization of, general thematic ideas. Okay, so then a couple of examples from the medieval period. A very famous text that comes after is called the Sangita Ratnakara. So what's interesting about this text is, this is maybe like 14th, 13th century time, 14th I think, 13th, okay. And the Sangita Ratnakara, very interestingly, talks about the fact that, in the Indian way of knowledge, you never say like your guru's wrong. Because the guru's kind of never really wrong. I mean, what they said was right for their time and their context. So, and you never like overturn the guru. You just have to kind of a little bit modify and add a little bit of what you have to say. So in Sangita Ratnakara and text, like this other text I worked on, Swaramela Kalanidhi, that was written during Vijayanagara times, they say things like, Bharata is great, no problem, everything Bharata said, but we also have to interpret what those theories are saying by incorporating ideas from the practice of music. So this is really important, that Shastra and Prayoga are also related. We don't just blindly follow theory. we see how music as it is practiced evolves, and we incorporate those things back into our theory. So there's like a constant reflection of the past and a reformulation of ideas building on the past. Not destroying the past, but building on the past. And this is a really important theme, again, in how Indian knowledge systems work. You don't have like the Kuhnian paradigm shift. You don't throw away Bharata altogether. You just keep adding a little bit more to Bharata. And that's how it works. So this is really important. And one of the things that came out of that period was the Veena had now evolved to a different stage. It kind of looked somewhat like you see a sitar today. It was a stringed instrument. It looked probably more like a South Indian Veena. And through this Veena, they do an analysis of notes and frets. And those 22 Shrutis, they're not thrown out, but they evolve to the 12 basic swaras that we use today in music. So there's a way of forwarding the knowledge without throwing away the past. That's the point I want to make. So 22 Shrutis, I mean, the idea is still there, but we are using 12 notes. And we're still using 12 notes today, basically. And we can return to this idea about Shruti and what it means, because there's a lot of debate on this. But as a practicing musician, I can say, I never learned any discrete idea of a Shruti. What you do learn is, in this rag, this gandhar is a little bit extra flat, or something like that. So again, context-based ideas of knowledge. It's really important. And that also relates to the whole idea of why we have this tanpura at sa. It's all context to this sa. Whereas in Western music, you have A, 440, it's a fixed thing. Like a Shruti is not a fixed thing. A Shruti is something defined in the context of that rag in that performance. This is a really interesting point to understand, and we can talk about it a little later. Okay, so another important critical development, of course, is what makes Hindustani music different than Carnatic music? These are two distinct but very related traditions, both using raga and tala, the foundations of the music, but kind of evolved in different ways. And fundamentally, Hindustani music developed in the north with the kind of syncretism that happened between Indian and Persian culture, put in a broad sense. And one of the great figures of that kind of syncretism is Amir Khusro. You might have heard of him. So again, kind of like a Bharata character. He has all these legends about him. Amir Khusro invented sitar. Amir Khusro invented tabla. Amir Khusro invented qawwali. He was Nizamuddin Aulia's great shishya. He was, a minister in the Delhi Sultanate. All these stories we hear about him. But again, what is the meaning of this? What are we deriving from this? Well, we know he had an Indian mother and a Persian father, so he represents that fusion of aesthetics and culture and ideas. And that's really what gave birth to the uniqueness of the Hindustani music tradition, and it grows out of that. So one of the innovations, for example, now, the difference that you find between the Veena that we were just talking about and the sitar was reversing the order of the strings. That was a big kind of change. So in Veena, you have to kind of pull your hand over to play the main string here, whereas now in sitar, the main string is here. And one of the reasons for that innovation is also so you can play the meend, which is the big bend. And that bending is something that happens a lot in Hindustani music. You don't hear, and there's of course gamaka and everything in Carnatic music, but the big bend is not so much there. Like what we call meend is not there in Carnatic music. So this idea, again, innovations are brought out by the needs of the music, and this is a technology that happened. So that is all very important to think about. Even the word sitar, they say is a Persian word, Sitar. It used to be a 3-stringed instrument. Obviously, whatever that instrument was fused with the idea of the Veena that was practiced and current in India. And even now in the Drupad, they still play what they call Been, which is, you could say, like a North Indian type of Veena. still left over. But the sitar is unique because of, again, the change in the string order. And then the other interesting thing, and that brings us into the modern era and the modern design of this instrument, which is really only about 100 years old. So here we're going all the way from 200 BC all the way now to, I'm saying, like 100 years ago, is when the innovation of this type of sitar came. What we call the tarafdar sitar, with these extra strings. So there's two bridges here, you'll see. There's this one main bridge, which is controlled by the main pegs, big pegs. And then there's this small secondary bridge, controlled by these smaller pegs, which these notes are called sympathetic strings in Western music because they resonate sympathetically. Means I never strike them or pluck them. But when you tune them properly to the raga that you're going to play, when the note is played on the main string, those sympathetic strings resonate on their own, sympathetically. You know, and that's what gives the modern sitar that kind of orchestral type of sound. So the other thing that came about, again, you know, what we think of as raga music today is very new. 100 years ago, well, let's say 200 years ago, you would never hear a sitar as a main instrument. It was all vocal. Sitar and all these other instruments were, you know, used for like incidental music, maybe in like a play or like a theater production, but no one would go to hear like an hour-long raga performance by a sitarist because the sitar just, you know, was mostly doing da di 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 da 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 that kind of stuff, or what we call tantrakari ang. But the gayaki ang, bringing the vocal quality of raga music, which is essential, had to happen only through technological innovation of an instrument that could keep the sustain of the sound, that could do the subtle kind of things that you needed to do to play raga music fully. And this also came about by the advent of microphones. Without microphone, it's very hard to have a sitar concert, you know? Especially in this kind of an environment. It's a pretty big hall. In the old days, it was all courtly music, small like mehfils, this kind of thing. So you didn't need all that kind of production. And again, even the sitar was not a big, no instrument really was a big aspect in terms of raga music. It was vocal music. What happened during, you know, post-independence time, it's the instrumentalists that really made it famous out in the world. This was the raga music for export. It's the Alipur Khan Sahib, it's the Ravi Shankar, it's the Vilayat Khan Sahib. These are the people that went out, played all around the world, and the whole world started to know about raga music. Not because they listened to vocalists, but because they listened to instrumentalists. And of course, you know, maybe there's a language issue and those kinds of things. But these people, Ravi Shankars, you know how, today we think of Pandit Ravi Shankar, the most traditional, but in his time, he was completely criticized for the things he was doing. The tabla. You know, in the old days, they would not even announce who the tabla player would be. Tabla would not get a chance to have solo. You're going to hear beautiful solos on tabla today, you know? So like, one of the things Ravi Shankar very famous for, and other people too, but you know, giving more prominence to the tabla, more positions, particularly in instrumental music. That kind of stuff. You know, maybe shortening certain aspects of the music to make it more presentable, you know? But he never like lost sense of rag. Never. When he played raga music, he played raga music. When he played other things, he played other things. But when the raga music was on, it was pure. And that's kind of how I feel too. These guys are asking what kind of music you're gonna play. Well, when I play raga music, it's totally pure raga music. So just to sum up kind of the things I've been saying is, the evolution of a tradition is predicated upon innovation and the idea of modernity. Because every moment in history, every moment in time, artists are you know, seized with the idea of how am I going to take this forward? And to do that, they're reacting to what is happening culturally, socially, politically in their time period and incorporating that into their music, and slowly, slowly, that's how things evolve. So as ancient as Indian music truly is, we know about ragas from, you know, thousands of years ago, the kind of instrument you see, the kind of music we're going to play is actually like a fairly new type of music, I would say, in the long history of things. So basically, the idea that tradition is something static or something that we need to preserve and hold on to the point of, not allowing change is actually, I think, contrary to how the tradition has really evolved. And in every modern context, people are going to be criticized probably for innovations or changing things. But maybe 100 years after, they'll look at that as the most traditional thing. So, on the last point I want to make, though, because I do think there's a lot of bad fusion music out there, the idea of fusion, what is fusion? You really have to be rooted in two traditions to properly fuse something. That's why I think someone like Amir Khusro was good, probably, at what he did. Adding a little bit of drums onto a raga, that's not fusion music. That's like making pasta and putting some garam masala on top. You know what I mean? Like it's not real kind of thing. So fusion or innovation, in that sense, if it comes from within the tradition, if it's born out of ideas that come from within the tradition, then I think it has a kind of sustainability and an ability to be incorporated. Like, for example, like I was saying, Ravi Shankar wanted to have more tabla. That was something he picked up from Carnatic music. This Taniyavartan was already there, pretty popular in Carnatic music. He wanted to bring that in a little bit more. So things coming from within have a better chance of like being incorporated into the whole. So that's what I wanted to say. And now we can listen to some music, because talking about music is, it's fun for a little while, but then you just want to listen to music. So thank you for listening. We're going to play. This is an evening raga, Raga Shuddha Kalyan, and short alap, and then short Vilambit Teen Tala, 16-beat cycle, and then Drut Teen Tala, and a little bit of Jala. Okay? And I really, again, want to, Charuji, thank you so much for being here, yeah. And all of you, Tanishta, Samir, and all of you for being here, thank you for giving your attention. It really means a lot, so thank you. See, here's a modern innovation right here. Usually we have a tanpura player who plays the drone. Now we use an app. If we had a tanpura, I actually usually play with the tanpura player. It's nice. But some things are okay. It's okay. So some of you that studied raga maybe a little bit, this raga sometimes they call it Bhoop Kalyan. And Bhupali is an Audava Audava, Sampurna, 5/5 Audo raga, pentatonic raga. So very, very common the world over, this pattern. Now, that's Bhoop. Bhoop Kalyan or Shuddha Kalyan uses that in the ascending, but then uses the Kalyan tat or the Kalyan scale on the way down. So the basic outline, Arohi, Avrohi of this raga is like this. So nice, right? So, now I always tell my students, that's like a skeleton. If you saw a skeleton of your friend, you wouldn't recognize your friend. You'd know it was a human being, but that's about it. That's what an arohi and avarohi is. It's dead. It's lifeless. It sounds nice, but the rag has to come to life. And that happens through our improvisation, through that momentariness of being together. So like all of you are also part of the performance. That's the essential thing. That's the mahol. It means that only, like the ambiance of all of us together. So I thank you for giving your attention, because that makes it all happen. So we will try to improvise and do well in this raga. So, thank you. Rag Shuddha Kalyan. playing with someone for the first time is also like, it's a great fun, so thank you very much. Really enjoyed it. And thank you for being a great audience. That really makes a lot of difference in the whole experience, so thank you very much. It's really a pleasure to be here with all of you. So,
Are there any quick questions? Feel free to ask.
or not so quick. Usually, like after this point, everyone's just like, you just need to like take it in. And
Yeah, I know. You just need to absorb.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay. Yes, kids. Yeah, you can come and see the instruments. No problem. Plus, no questions. Okay, good.
Anybody?
The music speaks for itself. Yeah. Hopefully, that's good. I don't. Come. Tabla, sitar. Yeah, you can touch it.
So once in a while, when I play, I get a con.
That's only when you do Riyaz.
Exactly. It's a sign of good practice.
This is a microphone. You want to try?
Say hello. Say hello.
Yeah.
Say hello.
Good.
Just experience.
Yes, madam.
So, you said that Hindustani and Carnatic music are like very different and miles apart because of like the virtual influence of Hindustani music. And like you gave the example that the strings are reversed in the sitar as opposed to the veena.
Yeah.
So, are there any more examples of this?
Yeah, so let me qualify that. You know, I don't want to say that they're worlds apart. They're still both have raga and tala. So fundamentally, they're very similar. And many times we'll meet Carnatic musicians, like I'll meet Carnatic musicians, and we can play. It might be a different idiom, but the grammar and the basic understanding is the same, so you can play. So they're very similar, but they're also very different, if that makes sense. So in like certain things, it's really quite different. So one of them was the meend, like playing those big means like we play in Hindustani music doesn't happen as much. In Hindustani music, in Carnatic music, the gamaka is usually only between 2 notes, whereas we'll do like this bigger between maybe 3 or 4 notes a lot of times. The biggest difference though that I would say, really, if you want to really talk music talk, between the exposition of a raga is the Hindustani music is fundamentally a swar-based, swar bistar technique. That means that notes get opened up in a sequential order. Like you saw in the alap, I started in the, sa, then I went down, and then I moved up slowly, re, ga, pa, da, and then to high sa. And it unfolds like that. So each swar gets kind of like its opening, its elaboration. Whereas in Carnatic music, bang, right from the first, you can go all over the place, up and down, and that's not an issue. So that's one big difference. Like the fundamental driving force of the raga exposition in Hindustani music is based on a swar by swar exposition. So that's, I would say, to me, the biggest difference. Another big difference is in tala. Like in Hindustani music, we have this idea of teka. And some people think that could be derived from, Western Asian musical techniques, which may be true. They kind of have some things like that. But the teka is like this pattern that sets it repeats. Whereas in Carnatic music, the mridangam is generally playing along with the song. The accompanists will know the song. It's more like a satsangat happening there. Whereas for us, it's more like we take turns and we support each. But in the middle, we also have fun, like as you saw, especially like in the drut, you can have more fun. So those are some of the main differences. But again, they do have this common bond also. So I hope that answered the question. Yes. No other questions? You guys are so quiet. Yes, sir.
So, thanks a lot. It was such a joy for me personally after a long time. So
Thank you.
Absolutely brilliant.
Thank you.
Something that I've always wondered. So, I personally like this rag called Rag Darbari Kannada. So I'm curious because it's called Rag Darbari Kannada, but by the time it reaches north, the word Kannada is knocked out, and often people call it Rag Darbari itself. So are ragas also regional? Because
Yes.
it started in Karnataka. And so do they change when they travel across geographies? For instance, Rag Darbari.
Right.
When someone refers to Rag Darbari, they're referring to Rag Darbari Kannada.
Right.
There's no difference between them?
Well,
in Lucknow Gharana talks about it compared to somebody in...
Yeah, so again, this is like the 100 sons of Bharata. I don't know if you heard what I was saying earlier, but everyone will have their different little bit of interpretation. And everyone has their own little bit different history of the rag. So Darbari, generally when we think of Darbari, you think of, this is the rag that Mian Tansen wrote when he was at the court of Akbar. And then the Kannada, that is what we would call a rag ang. So it has certain features. So typically the Kannada ang for Hindustani musicians is gamare. So if this combination comes in, then you definitively call it a Kannada ang rag, and you can call it Darbari Kannada. So maybe there's some people that don't play as much gamare, so they would prefer to just call it Darbari, S-I-A. Or later on, people extrapolated back and said, gamare is a phrase that's coming, so we should really call this Darbari Kannada? I don't know. So there's lots of debates that you can have about rag nomenclature and whatnot. For example, Bageshri. Bageshri is a rag. There's also Bageshri Kannada. There's another rag, Abogi. That's kind of considered a South Indian rag. Sometimes people call that Abogi Kannada. So there's lots of kind of nomenclature issues on that point. And then of course in South Indian music, they also love Darbari also. It became, and ostensibly that was something that came back from the north to the south. So a lot of circulation, definitely. And this movement of ragas is well known. So like there are many ragas that are popular now today in Hindustani music that are definitely kind of borrowed from the Carnatic system, you could say, like Hamsadwani or even Kirwani, Charukeshi, these kinds of things. And then vice versa, we know like Muthuswami Dikshitar spent a lot of time in Benares, and he picked up a lot of North Indian raga ideas and scales and patterns and whatnot, and incorporated them into his composition. So there's always been a lot of circulation going on, definitely. And back to your point, maybe they're not as different as we like to make them, but certainly it's like different regional kind of ucharana of a language. That's what it is. There's definitely a shared language. It's kind of like played out in different ways. Huh? Kind of. They're like dialects, you could say. Some people might say they're languages. That reminds me of A.K. Ramanujan's, he always loves quoting that, a dialect is just a language with an army. Or a language is just a dialect with an army. So it's like that, which gets political, of course, which also, music is also political in its own way. So, but anyway, the point is that there's a lot of circulation. Sorry, you want to...
In the world of music, you would consider Darbari and Darbari Kannada different, like in your mind, how would you see them? Separate? Like they're two different ragas?
To me, they're like the same raga. Yeah. But again, like there will be some ustads that say, no, Darbari matlab, you don't play this gamare phrase. You might play Dhanipa phrase, but you won't play gamare phrase. And if you start playing gamare, then you should call it Darbari Kannada. For example, in another big one that happens, a very common rag, Yaman. Right? Yaman is Yaman, but then some people play Yaman Kalyan. So what is the difference then? So some people will say Yaman Kalyan has a touch of the Shuddhama in it, whereas Yaman doesn't. So that's, and then other people will say Yaman Kalyan, okay, it doesn't matter. So yeah, so there's also discrepancy. So that's the thing. There's no definitive answer. And again, in our system, it's like, well, what I learned from my guru is what I know, and that's right, you know. And so you're kind of always paying homage to like keeping that correct. Yeah.
Actually, we do not talk in terms of right or wrong.
Yeah.
We talk in terms of appropriate and inappropriate.
But it's the same thing.
No, it's not. I mean, right or wrong binary doesn't stand a chance in the discourse of music.
But
We always use the terminology, this is appropriate. What you did in Shuddha Kalyan was appropriate, so it is Shuddha Kalyan. Had he decided to play Komal Devat in Shuddha Kalyan, then I would have said this is inappropriate. I wouldn't have said it's incorrect, it's wrong. I don't say that. I say this is not what is expected of a Shuddha Kalyan to behave melodically. So that's the difference. It's a nuanced difference, but it is there. Our discourse talks of appropriate and inappropriate.
Right.
Rather than right or wrong.
because who knows, there could be an ustad or a pandit somewhere where somehow they are able to incorporate Komal Daivat in Shuddha, and it became appropriate. And you know, we have this concept, like in the old literature, you know, you have Vadi, there's Samvadi, there's also Vivadi, like the out note. Now the out note can sometimes be an in note, you know? Sometimes the wrong thing is right.
And the idea of Tirobhav is already there. I mean, in our musical discourse, we have this conceptual framework where the pathways to deviate from the norm are also defined.
Right, right. And then, you know, if you move into a lighter rag, okay, then you have a lot more scope to add different kind of notes and other phrases. So that also is an appropriateness. Like certain rags, you don't want to move around too much. Other rags, you have a lot more freedom. So there's an appropriateness, again, always context-based. That's what I think appropriate means to me. Appropriate is about context. It's not about an existential, this is right or this is wrong. This can be right in certain contexts. So I will never say, assign it a right or wrong value. So the appropriateness comes by context. Yeah. Good questions. Oh, you guys are smart, huh? Yes, madam.
I would firstly like to say thank you so much for coming here. I'm so glad I was able to be.
Yeah, thank you.
Secondly, I like to preface this by saying that I'm not a musician, but I learned a lot about the taus. So I was wondering the taus, the peacock instrument. So I was wondering what the difference between the taus and how different it is.
You know, I don't know taus. Is it Iranian instrument?
I think it's played a lot in North India.
Really? Do you?
Actually, it's a version of Sitar.
Okay.
Where the end point where you would have.
Looks like a peacock.
Yeah.
See, I learned something great. What? Tell me about this instrument.
The instrument is Sitar.
Okay.
The making of the instrument is slightly different.
Achha, so what's the name though? I just want.
Taus.
Taos.
Taus.
Yeah.
There's also peacock throne, which is called Taus. I think that's
Yeah, so again, there's lots of variations in the instruments, true. And you know, another thing that's interesting is part of modernity for us today, all of us, is homogenization. You know, in the old days, you didn't have the chance to listen to ustads from different gharanas, like tabla gharanas. Take for example tabla, it's a perfect example. You know, tabla gharanas were like really pretty standard. You could, if you heard someone, you would automatically know this is Delhi, this is Farrukhabad, you would know this is Banaras, you could tell right away. Nowadays, it's hard to tell who's who because everybody listens to everybody and styles are getting homogenized. People are not playing, you know, just the repertoire of their gharana. What I'm getting, I'm not saying this is good or bad either, I'm just saying that with technology, we're listening to so much more, so that's a beautiful thing. But in another way, we're losing this kind of individualized, you know, distinction of gharanas, of different styles, and that happens in instruments too. So now, there's only two main sitar styles now, like instruments. There's this style which has the Gandhar Pancham, with the Kharaj strings. I didn't play those, the low bass strings. And then there's the Gandhar Pancham, which like Vilayat Khani school plays. So these are the two main sitar types. And like you're saying, these taos and all these other styles of instruments are kind of disappearing. And just on a small other point that I wish we spent more time on is the makers of these instruments. They are great talents that we need to like support, more and more if we can, because that is another great vidya that's being lost. I mean, people don't know how to make instruments anymore. And it's scary and sad. Look, there's so many people at this school. Look, there's this very small group here, which is, again, I'm not saying anything bad. Classical music always was kind of like a, rarefied music, but I really feel like if people are exposed, like, you said you're not a musician, but you could feel it, right? You can feel this energy, you can feel like a movement inside of you. If people just gave a little attention to it, I think they would really appreciate it, and have fun and enjoy it. But it's tough, it's hard. So thank you for coming and giving your time. One last question? No? Shiv? Yes, sir.
So just having what your policy on Indian and film in the current scenario, how it is.
Yeah, so I was supposed to talk a little bit about film. So, that was another great period. Like I was saying, like this, post-independence period when, you had the rise of instrumental music. Now, you want to talk about fusion music. 50s and 60s filmy music is like the best fusion music, in my opinion. This is like so many songs written in rag with, guitars and violins and some funky keyboard sounds, all going together beautifully, harmoniously. Really, like filmy music of that era is incredible. And even, my Guruji would always tell me, like, go listen to that song if you want to hear a nice version of, Yaman or whatever, So, and then little by little, the kind of rock influence went down, which is okay, but we still had Indian instruments. Now it's pretty rare to even hear Indian instruments. It's like everybody loves guitar now. Sitar is, you don't hear it as much, basically. So right now the film music, I feel like, it's fine. Film music is film music, but and this is true everywhere, just the level of, or the amount of real acoustic instruments being used as opposed to electronic instruments, and the number of Indian instruments being used has all gone down over time, I think, generally. So that kind of makes me sad. But again, like I'm saying, we can't be sad about these things. We just have to keep doing what we do. And, this is part of evolution and what it is. But I think, again, if we had some composers that kind of brought this stuff back, I think people would enjoy it and would like to hear that. And I wish that people would do that. So I don't know if that answered the question, but.
Yeah, it wasn't a question, it was more like.
My commentary? Yeah. I mean, look, I grew up playing guitar. That was my first instrument. I love guitar. I tried to teach Sitar at the IIT. Nobody signed up. Nobody signed up. 0 people. And then I was like, okay, TK, I'll teach a guitar class. I had like 60 kids like running to learn guitar, which is fine. Guitar is a very user-friendly instrument, I call it. You pick it up, 6-string, dunk, dunk. It's beautiful. I love guitar. I do. Sitar, you have to be serious. You have to like sit down. It takes time to tune. There's so many strings. You really have to be dedicated and do it. So playing instruments is not such a, I can understand that takes a lot. What I really would love to do, and what I try to do everywhere I go, is just take a little time to be exposed. Learn some basic things. See how much you can enjoy without being an expert rasika or something. You don't need to know about rags to appreciate rag. That's the beauty of music. So as long as we're just giving like a little bit of exposure, a little bit of, like these letdowns, like a little context, then it's good. It keeps things going. And it's important, so. Yes, Shiv?
Yeah, in the beginning you said that Indian musical tradition is to change and evolve with time.
Yeah.
But at least in the Carnatic music tradition in Tamil Nadu, there is a very strong restriction on the entry. And also
Yes.
they are curtailing any deviation from their own traditional music is kind of frowned upon.
Yeah.
Is it true?
Yeah, I mean, so like T.M. Krishna was just visited the other day at Brown and spent a lot of time with him. And he's one particular Carnatic artist who's pointed out the kind of very strong elitism that exists in Carnatic music, and it's very hard for non-Brahmins, non-Tamilians to even get access. Even Telugu Brahmins have a hard time in the music scene in Chennai. So yes, there's an exclusivity going on for sure. But people like TM are there, who's kind of expanding things, doing new things, and other people will follow. And little by little, it'll happen. But the thing is, when I was saying that tradition moves on through this kind of innovation and whatnot, you have to back out and look at how fast things have changed. Like I'm saying, the idea of a sitar on a stage like this with microphones, it's so recent in the whole big evolution. So the constricture of Carnatic music, I think, yes, for right now, the last 50 years has been pretty, or 75 years, let's say, pretty strict. Yeah. But I think maybe in a little while we'll see something opening up, and then something's gonna happen where it's gonna, something's gonna evolve. I feel it, I know it. It has to, or it's gonna die. And I don't think it's gonna die. Because if it stays static, that makes something brittle, and brittle breaks. But when you're flexible, you can adapt, you can move forward. So if it stays elitist, it's gonna die elitist. If it expands, then it will live. I really believe that.
Also, was this more urban-centric in the old times? Because if you go to more rural areas, you have their own folk songs. Every nukkad,
Yeah.
village that you have.
Yeah.
Did they also link up with this classical traditions, or they had their own individual distinct?
They did, and even well, not in Natya Shastra exactly, but in further text, the whole Desi Marga, distinction of the kind of classical way and then the more regionalized folk music is there. And there was always an interaction between the two. I mean, so many ragas are straight up folk melodies that were classicalized. So there was always a kind of interaction, and there's many folk singers that basically sing rags. They just don't call them that particular rag. They're just singing, or they just know a song, and it happens to be what some classical guy will call. So there was a very symbiotic relationship between folk and classical music. The other big thing is, both in the north and the south, well, the contexts are a little bit different, but a lot of this music, again, we have to admit, we have to talk about it. It is a type of elite music. So a lot of, I'll speak for Hindustani music, most of this stuff really developed in the courts. Mughal courts and the replication of Mughal courts in smaller darbars here and there. So, and then the zamindars kind of took over, as we moved into colonial period. So it was always, small groups of, connoisseur listening people. It was not mass appeal kind of music, Not to say that, again, the folk singers, they also were singing rags. But there's a difference between all of that. So in Carnatic music, the thing that was interesting is you had the temple space. So the temple space was a public space, but again, some people were not allowed into all those temples either. So, but ostensibly it was a more public space than a court setting, right? So the temple space was where a lot of these South Indian arts flourished and were propagated. So it's very, very interesting. Yeah. Yes, madam.
So kind of to comment on the whole exposure thing and also innovation thing. Do you think by okay, so I'm into music, and a lot of the instruments that I tend to work with are actually on the MIDI things.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of it is pretty digital, and I have never once played a violin, but I have definitely produced the sound of a violin. So do you think that somehow, because of all this innovation and because of MIDI instruments, it can kind of increase exposure, and then that will kind of spark that thing that people will pick it up again.
Right. I understand your question.
And that will also remove elitism to it, because everyone has access to the sound, if not the instrument.
Yeah.
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 Just a comment.
Yeah. Well, you're saying about MIDI instruments, you're saying particularly? Or you're saying Carnatic music or Hindustani music?
MIDI instruments.
Yeah, MIDI instruments. Yeah, in the sense that you don't need to have like years of training to get access to that sound.
To the sound.
Yeah, to the sound. Yes, so in some ways, like, I think always there's this process of a certain kind of democratization of the art. And so maybe like a MIDI keyboard is doing that. It's like now giving you the ability to hear all of these sounds just from your, your bedroom, and it's wonderful. It's great. So in certain sense, yes, I think it is good. YouTube. Look at what YouTube did to music. I mean, like, it's unbelievable. And like, we grew up in a time when there was no internet. Like, so this is like an amazing concept. Like, if we wanted to hear music, we had to go and buy like a cassette or a record. And now you just tuck any recording. I mean, I don't buy music anymore. All these great recordings, raga music, it's all on YouTube. It's free. It's amazing, But there's also issues with that kind of, openness also, is because now there's a lot of not such great music, if you ask me, also on YouTube that you have to like sort through. And then you need somebody to kind of curate that listening. And I think that's where good artists come in when, we're doing these kinds of things. And in addition to that, and getting back to the MIDI question, you have a live experience of a live violin player playing. That's something else. You can't. And that does something to you, right? And it's amazing. So I appreciate everything that all of this technology is doing for us, but I don't want us to lose these other experiences that are like beautiful.
I think it just mostly inspires you to go behind it more.
Yeah, and I hope that would happen, exactly.
That's what happens with me.
Yeah, good. Yeah, and you came here tonight, so that's good. Now you'll go to your sound bank and find the sitar and tabla and be like, oh yeah, this isn't really like what I heard, but this is cool. Yeah. Last question? Madam? Someone had their hand up? No? Great. Thank you so much. Thank you, Chirag.